The D&D multiverse is vast, and it depends on a balance, but there are those that would upset that. That's why we're talking to Mike Mearls about D&D's latest book, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes.
So the new book, our first book for 2018, is Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Not Tomb of Foes, as we showed off in the stream. The perils of picking up something off someone's desk. So structurally, it's very similar to Volo's Guide to Monsters. Both books have a good chunk of lore they're presenting, and then they also have big chunks of new monsters. Where Volo wrote about the culture of some of the most common monsters in Dungeons & Dragons, like orcs and mind flayers, Mordenkainen takes a bit more of a cosmic approach to things. But Mordenkainen being Mordenkainen, he's very interested in conflict. So his writing and his research focuses on the history of some of the big conflicts that have spanned the cosmos of D&D. He writes about the struggle between the elves and the drow. He writes about the Blood War. He writes about the Gith and their war both with the Mind Flayers and among themselves. And he talks about these sort of creatures in a big picture cosmic sense. And then the other really exciting thing about this book, for me at least, is that we've seen a lot of feedback of people asking for higher level monsters. So our goal with this book, and now I don't have the final table of contents, so things may have shifted in playtesting, and as we did our final development, but our goal was for half of the monsters presented in this book to be challenge 10 or higher. We really wanted to focus on very powerful creatures, ones that would pose a real threat to your campaign, and to help build out levels 10 and higher. We know now as we're entering, it's kind of funny to say this, like, you know, it's year 5 now of the edition, or depending how you count. And so we think players now want broader range of levels, both players and DMs. We know most campaigns don't reach beyond level 10, but we want to not only provide that aspirational element, but also give Dungeon Masters some very powerful creatures that you might just use as a part of the events of your campaign world. Maybe not something that you're meant to fight, but maybe something you interact with, or a creature that threatens a region that you might defeat not by fighting it, but by, say, enacting a ritual to banish it, things like that. But we really wanted to show off that higher end of power for monsters. And so when we look at the complete collection of creatures that we've made for the game, we have some more balance brought in across challenge ratings. Volo's was very much focused on lower challenge creatures, so we thought this would be a nice way to balance that off. So when we look at why this book, there's obviously a lot of different things we can do. Why this? So the first thing we saw was that we had a very positive response to Volo's. The reviews were very positive, the community feedback was great, and the sales were really good. We're very happy with the sales. So we knew we had a formula that seemed to work. Now, one thing we try to do, though, is avoid becoming too predictable. There's a little tension there, though, in the sense that we have other types of creatures and places that we do want to go into detail about to provide some more lore about. So we didn't want to just scrap a format that seemed to work for the sake of being different, but we also didn't just want to repeat what we did in the past. So the main two things that drove this book and its differences were first this idea that looking at feedback from players and Dungeon Masters, there was a demand for higher challenge creatures. So we wanted to really focus on what are very powerful creatures that can come in later on in the campaign, or that can present a really daunting challenge for parties below 10th level. And as we thought of that, that told us we needed to think big picture. We needed to really think cosmically about D&D. And one thing we try to do, there are many methods we do to settle on the final form of a book. But in this case, we thought to ourselves, having Volo as the author, as the sort of voice again, just didn't feel right. And then we thought, well, Mordenkainen seemed to be a good candidate. We had a few people to choose from, but we liked Mordenkainen because of his idea that he focuses on this concept of the balance. To Mordenkainen, today's friend could be tomorrow's enemy. He's really concerned with this idea that if any faction or any group becomes too powerful in the cosmos of D&D, that could lead to not an apocalypse in the sense that the cosmos is destroyed, but that one faction could just rise to dominate everything, similar to how the Mind Flayers at one point ruled almost the entire material plane. And so Mordenkainen not only would look at evil creatures, he'd also look at good creatures, and he would keep a close eye on any of the conflicts that had gone on for a very long time in D&D, essentially that were just part of the background element of the cosmos of D&D, like the Blood War, or like the feud between the Drow and other elves. These would be things he would keep tabs on, because quite likely if one of those struggles went from the low-level, constant, level of intensity, no one side getting a decisive advantage, if one of those tipped and one side was to win decisively and end that conflict, that could be something that signaled the end, that the balance was coming to an end, and that he would have to step in, or he would have to work with others to try to restore it. The way I like to think of it is, you might think a cosmos dominated by lawful good, well, that would be a lawful good place. The way Mordenkainen sees it is, well, in the lawful good universe, the neutral good people are the last ones sent to prison for the rest of their lives. That eventually, the classic thing, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That the cosmos functions because of the 9 alignments and because they are largely kept in balance.
So very much a very much more cosmic focus.
Yeah, really going back to the distant history of D&D and how it reflects today. Why is it that we have Drow living in the Underdark and elves and their relationship with Corlun, with Lolth, the dwarves, what's their origin and their ongoing war with the Duergar. It also looks at a variety of the player character races. And I think if you're looking at the player's handbook, all of the common races are at least touched upon, except humanity. Humanity is kind of a different beast. But it talks about dwarves, covers their history, culture, and their ongoing war with the Duergar and its origins. Elves and the Drow. And it talks about gnomes and halflings and how they kind of stand out, especially halflings, as not really being embroiled in these cosmic long-term struggles that the other folk of the world are. And so it gives you some insight into why these folk have become so prominent across the many worlds of Dungeons & Dragons, and how they ended up not only where they are today, but why we time and again see in D&D worlds that humans typically are the most numerous and most powerful. Even though if you were to look at elves and dwarves, they live much longer, they have much tighter connections to their deities. What is it about their culture and about their gods that stops them from achieving the ubiquitous power and empire building that we see out of humanity? Not that it's impossible, but typically it's humans who engage in that kind of endeavor.
If you were a new person to D&D entirely, this is one of the first books that you can just hand this to them and this is the D&D Multiverse.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we wanted to do, was create something where a new player dungeon master could read the chapter, say, on dwarves, if you're playing a dwarf, and really understand what it means to be a dwarf in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, the background and definitions we give don't determine all dwarves. We know there are always exceptions, but we wanted to build a good starting point to really let you get inside the psychology of a dwarf. How do dwarves think? How do they see the world? Applying that to elves, halflings, gnomes, the Gith, demons and devils too. The Blood War gets a similar treatment. We don't go so much into their history, but we do talk about demons and devils, and for devils, their society. For devils, they actually have a hierarchy and a government, a bureaucracy, where demons are more, we want to flesh out what does it mean to be a demon? How do demons think? They're chaotic evil. They don't have these real strict organizations. They don't have a hierarchy in the sense of someone is an appointed leader and they tell us what to do. Well, how is the Abyss anything other than just a realm of complete random chaos and violence? We talk about a bit how demons organize themselves, and we show how that is reflected in the Blood War, the ongoing war between demons and devils that rages across wherever the River Styx goes in the lower planes. Demons and devils fight, or at least try to fight.
You don't get into the divine, though, so much in this.
Not so much here. We do talk about deities, for instance, Morden in his relation to the dwarves, Corlun, and their relation to the elves. And Corlun really doesn't have a gender, so it's, And really, though, use that rather than say, here are the god's abilities and powers, we focus a lot more on the cultural and mythic influence that these figures have. Since they tower over the folk they've created and have an enormous direct influence on them, they really shape their culture, their attitude, and their viewpoints. So we really want to illuminate what that would mean for playing a dwarf or thinking about dwarves as you're building your campaign. And like everything we write, this is just the point of view of the sort of typical D&D world. We know, for instance, that in Dark Sun, elves are very different than they are, say, in Faerun. But we also have some ideas of why that is, but we don't really touch on that too much in this book.
You can pre-order Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes right here on dndbeyond.com by clicking on the link in this video description. I'm Todd Kenrick. Thank you for watching.